Hello, everyone. Let's go around the Big Ten here on January 28th, 2025. We have a lot of transfer portal stuff we're going to get into for the Big Ten here on the second half of the show. The first half, though, or at least the first third, we are going to talk about kind of the big news in the Big Ten this week, which was Ohio State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles leaving, and not for a head coaching job or the NFL or anything else, for another Big Ten defensive coordinator job, going to Penn State, being paid the highest amount of money a coordinator has ever been paid at the college level, over $3 million a year. I think $3.1 million per year was what it came out to. This surprised, I think, a lot of people at points. I think once Penn State got heavily involved, I think we kind of knew this might be a thing. But I think, if you would have asked, I think this would have been a little bit of a surprise. Chip, first of all, just your reaction to this. There's a lot of ways, I think, to attack this, different angles to go at this move. He is moving closer. He's from Philadelphia. He's moving much closer to Philadelphia. He's obviously getting a huge contract, but he was well paid at Ohio State. But what do you think of this?
Well, like you said, I think a lot of interesting angles. The fact that he's originally from the Philadelphia area, so that makes sense. It was just, I'm just going to say, it was a surprise considering the fact that, you heard the rumors, but in the back of my mind, maybe I'm just naive, but I was sitting there thinking, okay, he finally has, because Jim Knowles has been very abundantly clear about the fact that it takes time for his system to be fully implemented. So I'm thinking you finally get to reap the rewards of all of your effort and hard work over these previous few seasons. Like the talent, showed up on the field. You're a national champion. Like you said, Mark, it wasn't as though Ohio State was being tight with the purse strings for him in the first place. So the fact that, we're gonna hear all the rumor and innuendo about, this side wanted this and he wanted that. And I respect, I would be lying if I didn't say I have the utmost respect for Jim Knowles for the job that he did, but it's surprising. I just really thought that considering the national championship that he would want to bask, especially considering there's a lot of turnover, but there's a lot of talent coming back on that team that you would think that he would want to kind of enjoy the fact that he's kind of built the defense into the unit that he has.
Yeah, it's a little bit surprising for sure. We talked about the Oklahoma smoke about a week ago, and I just wasn't buying the Oklahoma stuff. I know he's got his fiance is from Oklahoma, and that's the tie people were making. But at the end of the day, he was going to go play for a defensive head coach who's on the hot seat and move, however many hundreds of miles further away from Philadelphia into a league where Oklahoma, really struggled this past year. That was going to be a reclamation project. And, I was kind of joking about it with someone we were talking about it. I said, they mentioned the fiance or whatever. I said, look, if you tell your fiance, honey, if we go to Oklahoma, I may not be employed in 18 months. And that doesn't snap her back into reality a little bit, then she's not the right one. So I just never bought the Oklahoma stuff. But then Penn State gets involved after. That was quick. They weren't involved very long because they had just lost Tom Allen when we were recording last week. We were just talking about the Tom Allen departure and that being kind of interesting. And so the Penn State stuff happened very quickly. That made more sense to me than Oklahoma. Again, you're going to a place where you'll be pretty much left alone by James Franklin to kind of do what you want to do with the defense. You're going to move closer to Philly. You're going to have talent because Penn State always has good defensive talent. And you're going to stay in a league you're familiar with. So there were factors there that made this more realistic for me than the Oklahoma stuff. But it's still a little surprising. It's clearly not about money. When Ohio State initially hired Jim Knowles, they made him the highest paid defensive coordinator in the country at the time. And, despite what's out there right now, the idea that Ohio State was way off of that 3 million number is not true. So this was not about money. For me, it was probably more about staff dynamics. I know Larry Johnson is the one who kind of constantly gets thrown under the bus with maybe not being on the same page as Jim Knowles. But I don't know that Jim Knowles and Ryan Day were on the same page very often during his time in Columbus. And I think Ryan Day was very stern, obviously, after that first Oregon game this year where the Ohio State lost, and kind of went into the defensive staff and I said, like, this can't happen again. Changes need to be made. You do things differently. And I just think it was a combination of, okay, I can be closer to Philly, still make a ton of money at a program that's going to be competing, for a national championship next year. Penn State's going to be a preseason top 3 or 4 team next year. And I can do that, maybe just a fresh start, maybe one too many arguments with the current group at Ohio State. That's kind of how I view this. And we'll see we'll see very quickly who was hurt most by this move.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up, because again, like the rumors of, friction between Knowles and Larry Johnson, and then kind of in the immediate aftermath of this, like with Ryan Day. And I say it with a smile on my face. If Penn State comes out and in the opening, few games, and they definitively have a jack position, on their roster, will know exactly, like you said, that he is truly being given complete free reign and carte blanche to run the defense without any interference. And, I'm going to defend Ryan Day here I realize that, he hired Jim Knowles, and as you said, he was the highest paid defensive coordinator, but Ryan Day was the one who was taking all the barbs and the critique, and and not to say that Jim Knowles was completely unscathed, but Ryan Day was the one who was in the crosshairs of the fans and the media. So I think, it's always, I guess I'm just from the mindset of that, when it comes to the assistant coaches, their job is to perform at the pleasure of the head coach. And in this case, Ryan Day, if he wanted changes made to the defense and Jim Knowles wasn't happy about it, I'm glad that Jim Knowles swallowed his pride during the course of the remainder of the season, because we saw the benefits of that. And to the further point that if Jim Knowles thinks that this is a better move for him long-term to be at Penn State, again, I have nothing but best wishes for him, with the exception of November 1st when Penn State comes back to town.
Yeah, like 2 big ones, obviously, on the schedule here for Penn State. Obviously, the rematch with Ohio State Saturday, November 1st in Columbus. That will be a very interesting game with a lot of storylines leading into it, and going to be a lot of motivation on both sides in that one for sure, and could very well be a top 5 matchup at the time. So that's going to be fascinating. But like he's going to get put under the microscope, and I know, like, I don't think Penn State's the pressure cooker Ohio State. I don't know that anywhere is the pressure cooker Ohio State is. Maybe Alabama, but like, it's like the pressure cooker in Columbus is nuts. But Penn State's not exactly a picnic either. They expect to win there too. And having Oregon come into town September 27th, week 4, after a pretty let's call it what it is, a very soft non-conference where they host Nevada, FIU, and Villanova in consecutive weeks. Then they get a bye. Then they host Oregon. Boy, that's going to be an early test.
Yes.
Obviously his work's not going to be complete in 4 weeks. You're going to give him more time than that. But, they go out there and Oregon throws up 40 and wins in Happy Valley. That's not going to be the greatest of starts to that marriage. So he's going to get tested pretty early out of the gate here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and just to we've talked about this previously before everything happened with Jim Knowles, is that, you just referenced Oregon, Penn State, even before the Jim Knowles hiring, they were, they say that imitation is the highest form of flattery. Ohio State, the fact that they had a lot of their, players on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively, come back. Now in Penn State's case, it's more on the offensive side of the ball. But I mean, the fans are expecting some, similar results. And Mark, I agree with you. I think, Penn State fans, I mean, they're kind of getting antsy with James Franklin, in the sense that, he's only beaten Ohio State one time, and that wasn't even a Ryan Day coach team. The success against Michigan, obviously the fact that they didn't play well enough against Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. So the pressure's on Penn State. I mean, it's not as though like he's going to a program that is expecting to, okay, like you can just, be kind of, so, and we'll go to if we make it to the college football playoff, that's great. But if we don't, no big deal. No, the pressure is on. The pressure is definitely going to be on Jim Knowles and James Franklin and Penn State.
Yeah. I mean, they're all in. They're all in right now. They got a lot of these guys coming back. I'm sure to very generous NIL packages. You've got this entire offense almost returning for the most part. You lose Tom Allen. So, like, you do the thing you probably need to do here if you're Penn State. Like, you lose Tom Allen. So what do? You go out and you get the defensive coordinator from the national championship team. Like, that's probably one of the best things you could do to replace Tom Allen. But as I look at their team, I'm like, okay, but can you find a receiver?
Right.
Find like a skill guy who can stretch the field and scare other teams. Because to me, that's where they need the biggest improvement is if they had one or two receivers on that team that legitimately scared defenses. I think they're probably playing Ohio State in the national championship game instead of Notre Dame. Knowles doesn't fix that for you. The portal hasn't fixed that for you.
Right.
So where's that going to come from? Because the rest of their roster looks fantastic.
Right.
But they've got to come up with a receiver or two, in my opinion. And obviously, we can talk about the Jim Knowles thing and everything else and the guys returning, but none of that has solved their wide receiver problem.
Right. I mean, I know we're going to be talking about the transfer portal here in greater detail, but yeah, Penn State didn't necessarily make a substantial splash in the transfer portal, within the Big Ten. And to that point, I understand the fact that, we still have, the possibility of in the spring and things can, who knows in terms of, I always say it's, you're asking a lot for, any true freshman to come in and make a mark, especially, at a crucial position like a wide receiver, but stranger things have happened. So like I said, I think Penn State, they are certainly, I like the way that you said that they're all in. I mean, they definitely are borrowing, what has worked for Ohio State and for Michigan. So let's give credit to the Wolverines because that's basically what they did a couple of years ago. They had all of their, veterans coming back. I think Penn State is thinking, okay, we can do this. We just need to, I guess in their mind, solidify the defense. We lost a good defensive coordinator. We're getting a better one now. We're certainly paying for a really good defensive coordinator. I'm going to be in that skeptical camp until I see it, especially like you said, at the end of September is going to be, like the first challenge that Penn State's going to truly face in 2025.
Yeah, and look, they're clearly a top 5 team going into next year. Clearly, in my opinion, they're probably top 3 team going into next year. I think that there's so much to like about that roster, but there's going to be some parallels to this team to last year's Ohio State team, or this past year's Ohio State team, where it's like, okay, big money contracts, players coming back, to change the narrative. Like there are some parallels to this Ohio State team, and the story ended very well for Ohio State, but the pressure and the trials and tribulations along the way were pretty brutal. And it's like, that's going to be this. I think Penn State has really put itself under the microscope next year, but that's why you do this, I guess. I mean, you're not, you're a big time program for a reason. And so these are the situations I think the fans certainly want you to be in, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on that team to really perform at a high level next year. And so we'll see if they can live up to it, or if there's, the same types of bumps along the way that Ohio State faced this year. But I do see some parallels there. Let's get into our big theme of the show, which is we're going to talk Big Ten transfer portal. Chip and I have each ranked our top 5 teams from the Big Ten in the winter transfer portal. Different, no official criteria for me. Right. I went a little bit. I really went quality over quantity. So some of my top teams didn't sign as many players as some other teams signed. So there's some, there's maybe some differing there from what maybe some of the recruiting rankings. I know like the recruiting sites rank the teams now. So my rankings probably look a little bit different because I think the number of players you get out of the portal kind of skews that a little bit for some teams. But we're going to get into it. I'm going to go first, and the only reason for that is I think it's going to make sense for who I have number 4 and who you have number 5.
Sure.
In terms of talking about it. So I will start with my number 5, and then we'll get Chip's number 5, and then my number 4, etc. down the line. My number, my number 5 is Minnesota. I think PJ Fleck. Obviously, they had a couple of tough losses in the portal. You lose Phillip Daniels to Ohio State. Your offensive tackle, your right tackle, projected starting right tackle. So that was kind of a tough one for them. They've lost a couple other guys to some other Power 5, Power 4 programs. But, other than Daniels, I don't think anything too tough. I like several of their additions. I really like Malachi Coleman from Nebraska. I know it didn't work out perfectly at Nebraska, but he is still a 6'5" receiver that can run, make athletic catches, was a big-time recruit coming out of high school. This is a guy who I think can have a revival at Minnesota, so I thought that was a very savvy pickup for PJ Fleck and company there. They go out to get a guy like Javon Tracy from Miami of Ohio, who just had a tremendous season at Miami of Ohio. So that's another receiver to pair with Malachi Coleman. But Javon Tracy has a couple of years left, but Javon Tracy is a sophomore at Miami this year, 57 catches, 818 yards, 7 touchdowns. So highly productive kid moving up in competition. You get a couple of linemen in there, Dylan Ray from Kentucky. I like Khalid Tafai from Washington. He started a couple of big games for them this year as I believe a redshirt freshman. So he is looking to probably go in there and replace Phillip Daniels and probably be their starting right tackle. I think that's a high upside guy with multiple years left. They get AJ Turner from Marshall, which was another guy that I really kind of in the same vein as like a Javon Tracy in terms of a guy who was highly productive. He was a redshirt sophomore this year at Marshall. 864 yards rushing and 6 touchdowns, 8.3 yards per carry for AJ Turner. So I think Minnesota did a really sneaky job. Yes, like Malachi Coleman's from a big program. They got a couple of offensive linemen from other Power 4s, but they went down a level and are bringing some guys up who had big-time sophomore years, breakout sophomore years. We're going to be stars in like the Sun Belt, MAC conferences this year. They go and get those guys kind of under the radar pickups. I think those are big-time pickups for PJ Fleck.
Oh, yeah. I think PJ Fleck, I mean, he's definitely one of the guys that when it comes to the transfer portal, I think he does it well. And I for the record, I truly thought of putting them in my top 5. Just moving into my top 5, I know we're going to be, a lot of ours are going to be similar. Not that Ohio State fans are going to be happy about this, but I'm going to have that team up north. I'm going to have the Michigan Wolverines as my number 5 team. And I realize this is kind of a very unscientific way of approaching it. But I'm going off of the fact that a number of the guys that Michigan is bringing in via the transfer portal, Ohio State, when these guys were in high school, Ohio State was actively trying to land themselves. And, just to kind of put it in perspective, probably the biggest name that I know that Ohio State fans were kind of excited about, but it never really materialized. Running back Justice Haynes. I think that's a kind of guy that can be a plug and play, especially, considering the style of offense that Michigan likes to run. Defensive lineman Damon Payne, another Alabama guy, a typical, guy that you figure can be like just a big, like interior defensive lineman, clog the middle, make things difficult for the opposition running game. Another familiar name to Ohio State recruiting fans, linebacker Troy Bowles coming over. And then here's a guy that I'm I'm thinking that it didn't really pan out at Indiana, but he just seems to me in terms of like his build, his makeup, wide receiver Donovan McCulley, I think is the kind of guy that like, he just looks like physically like a stereotypical Michigan receiver. I realize that sounds kind of strange, but just that lanky, big wide receiver that, in terms of, maybe not necessarily, be like the burner type, but like really good, at walling off, good possession receiver. So that's kind of where I think that Michigan did a really solid job in the transfer portal, especially considering the fact that, like this past year was disappointing for them in the first year of the new coaching staff. So maybe this group can help them get back into contending for the Big Ten.
And I have Michigan number 4. So that was really bringing to mind. My number 4 is Michigan. And, you hit on a lot of the reasons why I think Troy Bowles probably will have a nice revival at Michigan. I refuse to believe he's not going to be a really good college player. Justice Haynes was a tremendous pickup. Trey Williams gives them some size in the middle that they need to replace. Kind of a good plugger there at the one tech. And really, I think one of the most underrated pickups was TJ Metcalf from Arkansas, the defensive back, safety prospect. He had 3 interceptions this past year. For Arkansas, 56 tackles as a true sophomore. So I think TJ Metcalf is one of the more under the radar transfer portal pickups. I think he'll do a great job in Michigan's defense. So I have Michigan 4. They've done this in a way similar to a couple of my other top schools, which is right now they've only signed, I think, 10 guys from the portal. But they've done it kind of surgically, like, okay, we need this, and this. So let's really hit those areas hard. And that's what they did. And, look, they also bring in Mikey Keene, quarterback from Fresno State. And look, I'm a huge Underwood fan, but like this can't be the expectation to just throw Bryce into the fire week 1. If he's just that good, then he's just that good and you do it. But I think giving you some insurance against that of not having to do it is big. Mikey Keene's a good player. He's athletic. He's like, I don't know how to really. He's like a pain for deep. Like he's tough to sack. He runs around. He's kind of a little guy. Drives opposing defenses a little nuts. So it's a good veteran pickup there at quarterback for them, who certainly better than anything they had on the roster this year. Or certainly that was going to be ready this year at least. Jaden Davis still obviously could. We'll see what happens there. But I thought that was an underrated pickup as well, and gives them a little bit of insurance so that it's not like, okay, when's Bryce Underwood ready? Like it doesn't have to be week 1 for Bryce Underwood. So who do you got it for, Chip?
Okay. Well, at number 4, this is where, we have a difference of opinion. And again, real unscientific method here. I'm relying on what I saw from Curt Cignetti last year. So maybe that I realized that I shouldn't allow that to kind of cloud my judgment. The fact that they're bringing in 19 guys, that the fact that he was so judicious last year, and was able to, get these guys, meaning Indiana, playing at such a high level. I'm thinking that, maybe lightning strikes twice. Some of the most notable names, a name that's going to be familiar to Ohio State fans, Zen Michalski is going back home. He's going back to Indiana. And I realized that when Zen Michalski, when he was given an opportunity to play at Ohio State, it was kind of disappointing in that Nebraska game. And then he, was injured and didn't really contribute much down the stretch in the playoff run. So maybe a trip home, maybe that's all he needs, to kind of, get a potential career, back on track. And then like some of the names that I'm genuinely excited about for Indiana, from Maryland running back, Roman Hemby, he's a guy that I could see, like we talk about, like that plug and play, come in, be able to contribute to that offense. And then at quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, from Cal, they did it before, with Curtis Rourke. I think they can do it again. So it's like, that's kind of, I realize it's not necessarily the most logical of explanations, but it's the fact that I'm buying into what Curt Cignetti kind of, along the lines of what I said earlier with what you did with Minnesota and PJ Fleck, that I think they just have a good eye for, players that will fit their scheme and will fit the program, and they'll be able to get them in and contributing to the program right away.
Yeah, so for the record, I had my top 4 was pretty clear cut. Like these were my top 4. But I had like a 3-team deal there going at 5, and I couldn't, eventually I settled on Minnesota. Indiana was one of the other schools I considered, and I'll mention who the third one was here when we're done, because if I mention them now, then they're not coming up. So, but it was a 3-teamer for me. If I could have done a top 7, I would have done a top 7. I thought they were the clear 7 best in the conference, but yeah, so we weren't far off on Indiana, who probably would have come in at like number 6 for me, and they're number 4 for you. So we weren't too far off on Indiana. I do like a lot of their pickups via the portal. The kid from Cal, Mendoza, quarterback's a big one. Hemby I've always liked Roman Hemby. You get Lewis Moore from Ole Miss, could be an interesting one. Holden Stays from Tennessee, a tight end, could be an interesting one. Rylan Gandy from Pitt at corner. These are all guys who I think can probably contribute for them next year at some level. Some of them will probably be star players like Hemby and Mendoza, but they made some sneaky good, I think, pickups here. And obviously they threw a lot of, because they kind of had to, because they brought in a lot of veterans from James Madison, so they had a lot to replace, but they got 19 guys coming in from the portal. So they really hit the portal hard. And yeah, I think Cignetti has done a good job here so far. All right, number 3. My number 3 is the school I think who's used the portal the least, but I just think they've done a great job in terms of the quality department, and that is Ohio State. They're not going to win like the transfer portal recruiting title. That's going to go to a school probably that signs like 20 guys, but with just 6 guys, I mean their average. Because if you look at like everyone always looks like the average star ranking for high school kids, but their average portal ranking is pretty high too. They are 5th among all programs in average ranking of their portal commitments. So there's only 4 schools ahead of them in terms of the quality of player they've landed in the portal, and only one of those is a Big Ten school, and it's actually my number 1 school. So, which we'll get into in a second. But so I think Ohio State's done a tremendous job. I talked about Michigan being surgical. Ohio State was the same way. C.J. Donaldson comes in. If he's not your starter at running back next year, he's definitely part of a 1-2 punch with James Peoples. So you get an instant impact guy there at running back. You're going to get a starter at offensive tackle in Ethan Onianwa from Rice, who was one of the top offensive tackles available. Philip Daniel, you may get 2 starting tackles. Philip Daniels has 3 years left. Very talented kid. Was a kid I wanted Ohio State to offer in high school. And it went to Minnesota, started like the second half of the season for Minnesota at right tackle as a redshirt freshman. Ohio State's got 2 open tackle spots. I think he'll probably be the favorite to start at right tackle for Ohio State this fall. They go and get Logan George from Idaho State, who had a ton of big offers. A bunch of big schools, Oklahoma, a bunch of big schools wanted Logan George. They were able to win that one. He'll give them some pass rushing depth. And then you go in and they've got Max Clare, who was arguably the top tight end in the portal from Purdue. That gives them a different dynamic offensively with Max Clare's ability to catch the football, something they didn't really have a lot of this year. So that's a huge pickup. And then they get a depth linebacker in Ty Howard from Duquesne, who again will give them some depth and experience there. But I've got them with 4 immediate starters and like 2 or 3 impact players here.
Yeah, I love what Ohio State did. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. If anything, I guess I probably took
get over only 6 editions versus like 20.
Yeah, it's one of these things where it's like I probably in hindsight probably should have gone more for the quality versus the quantity route, because that's kind of where, like with my number 3, it's definitely on the quantity. And I'm going to just say it right now. It's like, as much as I respect Luke Fickell, this year is very pivotal. And I will say that I'm happy in the sense that at offensive coordinator with Jeff Grimes coming in, it's more along the lines of what I thought he should have done in the first place when he went there. It's like, okay, again, I have nothing against trying to throw the ball. But I also think that, you have to, to your core, you have to respect who you are. And I think Jeff Grimes is going to get back to, a much healthier balance offensively as it relates to Wisconsin football. That being said, in the transfer portal, part of the fact that, like that they're bringing in 18 guys, like I said, it's kind of like necessity time. The fact that they're bringing in Idaho wide receiver Mark Hamper, another name familiar to Ohio State fans, Jaden Ballard, maybe a change of scenery. This is all he needs. Like, I genuinely had always hoped, I always pull for all the Ohio kids, especially when they sign with Ohio State. It just never seemed to really, turn into, it just seemed like the talent was there, but it just never could be consistent enough for Jaden Ballard to be on the field. So maybe, going up to Wisconsin, maybe that's what he needs. And let's face it, Wisconsin has had substandard quarterback play. They're bringing in two. They're bringing in Danny O'Neal from San Diego State. And the guy that I think is going to probably wind up winning the job, I realize I have no inside information on this, but I think quarterback Billy Edwards Jr. from Maryland, he did a solid job at Maryland. I think he can do the same thing for Wisconsin. So again, my rationale, I probably should have focused more on the quality versus the quantity, but I'm just thinking that Wisconsin recognizes the fact we've got to do something different. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, like an edge player, Tyrese Fearby from Kentucky. I think that, is a guy that can come in, on the defensive side, as well as, we know that Wisconsin loves to throw to the tight end. So they're bringing in a Louisville tight end, Tanner Koziel. So I think that Wisconsin addressed a lot of needs. I just want to see them get back to that strong traditional running game, good offensive line play, consistent quarterback play, and being a more than a fringe, bowl team, like get back to like consistently winning like 8 games, which I think Wisconsin definitely has the ability to do.
Yeah, they've got some interesting pickups. I think the one I like, is kind of under the radar, is Mark Hamper, the receiver from Idaho. He was a redshirt freshman this year at Idaho and had 48 catches for 966 yards and 6 touchdowns. And they desperately need playmakers. So I think that's an interesting one as well, going down a level and bringing up a star player from the FCS level. So that was an interesting pickup for them. But yeah, you're right. It's a huge year for Fickell, and I would go so far as to say the success rate of this transfer class may determine his job security long term.
Exactly.
Like, if he whiffs on this transfer class, I don't know. I don't know if he survives.
Right. Or the athletic director, because let's face it. I mean, he's the one.
They're in the same. They're in that same boat together, in that canoe together. They're both paddling that canoe together right now. Yep. So, big year for them, obviously. On to our top 2.
Yeah.
My number 2 program in the Big Ten transfer portal winter rankings, Nebraska. I've always kind of been a Matt Rule guy. I've kind of expressed that on this podcast several times. I think he's got them going in the right direction. I think he's also done a very, very good job this winter in the transfer portal. They have got both quantity and quality, in my opinion. They have one of the higher average player rankings in the portal, and they also have 247's rankings have them the number 10 transfer portal class in the country. Elijah Pritchett, offensive lineman from Alabama, monster pickup, one of the best pickups of the cycle. That was again, I think that's a huge one. You go and you poach Idaho again. Andrew Marshall, a corner, had a very good year at Idaho this year. It's another guy you kind of go down and get. Neziah Hunter, receiver from Cal. Deshaun McCullough, the linebacker from Oklahoma. Here's a one, talk about high upside. Williams Nwaneri from Missouri. Big time edge player. I think, look, Dane Key from Kentucky, like they got minimum 4 impact players here, maybe 6 or 7 high impact players next year. Yeah.
And again, it's one of these things where, you and I are of a similar mindset. I have Nebraska as my number 1. I'll just say it right now. That basically the fact that they're definitely on the right track. Like the fact that, all right, yeah, they didn't go to a bowl game that any big Nebraska fan or the coaches wanted them to be in, but the fact that they made a bowl for the first time since 2016, was huge. And to your point, I think the fact that they added players at key positions, McCullough is a guy that, you want to talk about like what might have been, the fact that he was an Ohio State commitment and it never turned out. The fact that he's bounced around has me kind of curious, but I think at Nebraska, he definitely can make an impact. Wide receivers, is something that I think Nebraska certainly saw a need for improvement. So they address that need, and then, like you said, Williams Nwiri at defensive line is a guy that Ohio State had interest in. Certainly, the fact that he's going to be now at Nebraska is a good thing for the Cornhuskers. So this is one of these things where it's like, this might be a transfer portal class that takes Nebraska from just that fringe bowl team to the next level, which would be a good thing for Nebraska.
Yeah. Look, there is certainly a little boom or bust potential with some of these guys. Like Nwiri was, I don't know, just didn't click right away at Missouri, even though he's a 5-star kid. That, you think maybe it's just a new change of scenery works. Jason McCullough has, I think, been kind of an enigma at times, but they've supplemented that with guys like Elijah Pritchett, guys like Neziah Hunter, guys like Dane Key, who I think are pretty safe picks in addition to being high impact guys. So I love this class for Nebraska. And I agree with you. I think this has the potential to bump them up one tier in the Big Ten, especially when you consider some stuff they have coming back in another year with Matt Rule and some consistency in the offseason and everything else. So I think Nebraska for sure stock up. So they were my number 2. They were your number 1. Let's get to my number 1, your number 2.
Exactly.
Oregon.
Yep.
I believe the number 1 per player average ranking in the portal. They have absolutely crushed it. But again, just 9 commits. So it feels like they just like went nuts in the portal as far as like just taking everybody, but they really did. They only got 9. I mean, they're on the lower end of this. So like there's some consistency with my top, 3 of my top 4 have 10 or fewer guys. But you look at who they got, Dylan Thieneman from Purdue, impact player at safety. You get Bear Alexander. Again, that's a bit of an enigma there as well, but supremely talented interior defensive lineman. Jamari Johnson, supremely talented tight end from Louisville. Mekhi Hughes, big-time running back from Tulane. Isaiah World, big-time offensive tackle from Nevada. Like, this is, again, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 9 guys here. Like, 6 or 7 of them look like they could be impact players.
Yeah, the fact that, like you said, it's like Oregon, I mean, they were aggressive, and Dylan Thieneman was one of those guys that Ohio State fans were like, okay, like he's contemplating Ohio State, and then it didn't happen, and the fact that he went to Oregon was kind of salt in the wound. And then Oregon, like they're getting offensive linemen that Ohio State, because let's face it, Ohio State's depth at offensive line, I can't say enough good things about the performance of the Ohio State offensive line in the college football playoff, but depth is a concern ongoing for Ohio State. So the fact that Oregon was getting these offensive linemen, that Ohio State certainly would have loved to have had, and then like you said, like Mekhi Hughes, who was, real talented running back, Jamari Johnson, really talented tight end. So Oregon, that's kind of, where we started off at the very beginning of this podcast. We were talking about Penn State. My thoughts on going into the Big Ten next year, like you're looking at, I know that Ohio State's going to be highly ranked, and they should be, but Oregon and Penn State, especially with, what Oregon has done supplementing in the transfer portal, as well as a really good recruiting class, Penn State with the players coming back, the addition of Jim Knowles, that it certainly makes sense and warrants the fact that both of those teams are going to be highly rated going into 2025.
We've kind of puffed our chest out a little bit about the Big Ten the last month or two, how it's kind of taken the mantle from the SEC. But we've also kept saying like, hey, this could change, right. just as the SEC was dominating for a while. Now the Big Ten's sort of taken, in my opinion, the label as the best conference in college football. It can always swing back another direction, but I'll tell you what, it doesn't look like the Big Ten's going to be just giving that away very easily next year. You got 3 top 5 teams coming back. Oregon looks loaded again. Penn State's loaded again. Ohio State's loaded again. You got to think Michigan's going to be better. Teams like Nebraska and Minnesota could be better. Illinois should be really good again. And then you see what Fickell does at Wisconsin, see if Cignetti can kind of keep that going in Indiana. But this is a conference that, in my opinion, is going to be even deeper than it was last year.
Oh, certainly. Certainly. And let's not forget, like Washington was one of those teams that,
Yes.
I mean, that was a weird transitional year for Washington. And I genuinely have a great deal of respect for, like the coaching staff that came on board. Granted, it was kind of like strange circumstances and everything, but like they were able to get a bowl game appearance out of, for Washington in a transitional year. Let's see what they do with a full off season of, transfer portal, with incoming recruits, being able to kind of fully implement their system the way that they would probably prefer to do it. And I think Washington will be improved. So yeah, like the Big Ten is it's going to be intense from day one, for the whole season, because I obviously believe that, we've talked about Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State. There's going to be no shortage of teams that are going to be in that top 25.
And I'll throw out another team. This was the third team for me. I said there were three teams that I considered for my number 5 spot in our portal rankings here, and they were Minnesota, Indiana. My third team that almost made my top 5 was Michigan State. With another year, Jonathan Smith, I think they'll be better. And then they go out, they get Connor Moore from Montana State, the offensive tackle, one of the top offensive linemen in the portal. They go and snatch him, give him a big NIL deal, beat out Ohio State for him. They go and get this will be one of the, this will, mark my words, clip this for people out there who love, doing the freezing cold takes or whatever. Clip this for later. I'm going to be right on this. Krishawn McCray from Kent State, the wide receiver they got, absolute stud, absolute electric player. I think he's got 2 years left too. You put him next to Marsh, you put him in the slot next to Marsh, or you just put him opposite Marsh, and you've got some receivers now. Like you've got some weapons. So I think they're going to take a step up as well next year, but I like their portal class too.
Yeah, Michigan State, it's one of these things where they were so close to making a bowl in the first year with Jonathan Smith. I think, like you said, the fact that they were very productive within the transfer portal as well as within their recruiting class, that I think that they're ready to take that next step and get back into bowl game eligibility.
Yep. So a lot of excitement right now around the Big Ten, rightfully so. Again, 3 of the top 5 teams in terms of Vegas's odds to win the next year's national championship coming in the conference. And then you've got all these other teams that were like middle of the pack that all seem to be improving their rosters this offseason. So I think the Big Ten season next year is going to be, I thought it was really exciting this year. It's going to be crazy exciting next year. Some of the matchups are great. We're going to get some matchups we didn't get this year. We're going to, like Ohio State's going to have to go play Illinois. Oregon's going to have to come in and play Penn State in the regular season. So there's Ohio State. Well, Ohio State's going out. Is that UCLA this year?
UCLA is coming.
Washington.
Yeah.
UCLA's coming in. They're going out to Washington, so we get that.
Correct,
one.
And that's in September.
Yeah. So like there's some cool matchups. There's some. I think a lot of these schools did well in the portal. The fact that I had like 8 schools I was thinking about for this top 5 is a good sign, because it was tough for me to put together that final that 5th school. So we'll sign off here in a second, but I'll just recap our top 5. So our top 5 Big Ten transfer portal classes so far for the winter cycle. Mine was 1 Oregon, 2 Nebraska, 3 Ohio State, 4 Michigan, 5 Minnesota, and then Chip had Nebraska 1, Oregon 2, Wisconsin 3, Indiana 4, Michigan 5. So those were our, if you guys got, lost in the shuffle, because we're, going on 45 minutes here. So for those of you who are like me and lack the short-term memory to keep up with things, those were our top 5s. But we're going to continue to do more reviews of the portal here this month or into February. We'll talk about maybe some like the impact players, or maybe get into some more individual players.
Yeah.
We'll get into some other storylines as well throughout the next few weeks, but hope everyone enjoyed this episode. There's like no more football left. I'm sorry. Enjoy the Super Bowl. We'll be back before the Super Bowl, so I can't even tell you guys that.
Right.
It's unfortunate. I'm a little bit of depression starting to set in, realizing like, this is it for a little bit, but spring ball won't be too far away.
That's right.
We'll get into the spring ball storylines at that point. But again, hope everyone enjoyed this. Please leave comments on YouTube let us know that if you enjoyed it, let us know that you did. If you didn't, if there's things you'd like us to do on the program, please get in the comments, let us know that, or things we can change. Please let us know that as well. It helps us deliver the content you guys want to have. So appreciate everyone watching and listening, and we'll see you again here soon.
Take care.